How is everyone? It's time for our last assignment in drawing and painting, and it is called chiaroscuro. Just kidding, it's actually called chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is extreme contrast between light and dark, so the assignment's title is basically a phonetic pronunciation of that. Essentially what we're going to do here is ground a board with a solid dark acrylic and then transfer a drawing and paint half of the face in extreme light and alternate between a technique which is called scumbling and glazing. Alright, going to mix up a purple. This is called a palette knife, wonderful for mixing paint. So, slosh these two together, mix up a purple. Next, for the actual paint application, I'm going to use a house painting brush. You don't want to ground with a small brush. So what we do is we dip into the paint, and then we come over here to our water and dip into the water. So that ends up giving us a I don't know if you can see this. That ends up giving us a more watery application. You can see that with the water going in the same direction, we end up getting more of a rapid coverage, and it's a little ethereal, I suppose, with these light and dark areas. Provides some interest too, because it's not just one solid color. Alright, since we're going to be working on a dark background and we want our drawing to stand out, we're going to use white Conti and shade the back of our paper. Now, in most semesters, when we have more time, you'll be working off of a photograph of yourself, and we'll be drawing this on a grid. The semester in which this is being recorded, we've got such little time. We're going to use photographs from cast photographs from Avengers Endgame posters, and we're just going to transfer these in the interest of saving time. So my drawing is going to be of Chris Evans, Captain America, and we position that over the top of our board, holding it down, and then we're going to trace it to transfer the highlight and midtone sections. The trick here, and maybe even only the highlight areas, I think we're just going to do the highlighted areas. The trick is, if you can't see something, you're not going to transfer it. Because as soon as you start saying, like, oh, the back of the head, I know it exists, but I can't see it, that's when you start making it up. So the whole point of this painting is you're only actually painting half of a face, but the lighting, if you do it properly, is going to give you the illusion of a full head that is submerged into darkness. So I'm just transferring this roughly. I should check actually to make sure that it's transferring. It is. And I'm doing this very quickly. You could definitely be more careful than I'm being. Alright, so there's my transferred drawing of Chris Evans. This road map is going to be invaluable, but at this stage it might not actually look like anything. And we're going to start off using a large brush, and we're really going to be using large brushes for the entirety of the painting, and painting in the light areas. And you notice the way I'm going to take my paint is just from the exterior, and we're going to work in a dry brush method, which is called scumbling. To mix my lighter color, really what I want to do is bring the darker colors towards the lighter colors. If I end up using exclusively white and yellow here, it's going to look like it's just yellow. So I just want to make it a little bit more complex by adding a little bit of red and possibly even some blue to this after. If it's too saturated. Right now the painting's very dark. You're about to see this emerge from the shadows here, and I'm turning my brush to go in the direction of the form. And here that dry brush really comes in handy in terms of suggesting the light rolling across the hair. Look at the texture of the hair that's coming out just from the nature of the brush there. It's wonderful. Now I like this method because in part it's pretty forgiving. Well, that is, if you're applying it too heavily, you're not really going to be able to recover from that. It's forgiving and workable if you're applying your scumbling layers in this kind of dry chalk-like manner. But you'll see there's a back and forth to the process. So typically you want to start off to the left and distribute your colors downward. And I just kind of want you to note how infrequently I'm going to be dipping into the paint. There's quite a bit of paint on the brush here, and I'm going to be using every last bit of it. You can really already see him so quickly emerging from the shadow, changing the direction of the brush. I realize that working with such a large brush may really be out of some people's comfort zones, but you'll get used to it. The more you hold that brush, the more natural it appears. Obviously, like, we hold pencils in our hands much more frequently, whether we're writing or taking notes or anything like that. But you're not taking notes in math class with a paintbrush. So a lot of it is just forcing yourself to become more familiar. I'm definitely at a point where I have to get more paint on my brush. But again, it's a dry brush, so scratching along the surface. Now this is a little bit on the creamy side, like it's a little too white. I wish I had a little bit more pigment there, but we're so early in the process that it's not really a big deal. I'm just looking for all of those lights. I gotta be careful that I'm not accidentally painting over areas that are supposed to be shadow. Anything that's shadow, you're just going to leave the ground of the board the whole time. You're never going to paint that with scumbling. But you'll see, like through the glazing process, that the glazes make it push it back further. So this will end up having, even though I'm painting on some of these areas that are not as light as I'm painting them here, they're going to fall back with the glazing. Like, the glazing is going to send them back in space, and it's going to give them more unity. So really I'm doing this high exposure, rough layout with one color. Very, very dry. You notice I'm even like pushing the paint into the board because I have so little of it. That's really a result of the fact that there's not a lot of paint on this brush. So really kind of have to work to get it off of the paintbrush. I'm going to look for my highlights that are down here on the lower portion of the painting that are obscured when the painting's covering up the photo. Need some more paint. So this is my third kind of re-dip. Actually, you know what? You should probably mix a little bit more than I did at first, because clearly when you end up putting it, you make it so thin after, it dries out very quickly. So I'm just going to mix this in bulk a little bit more and then kind of take it off of the brush. And I realize, like, I don't have the same color that I was working with a moment ago. That's fine. Like, you shouldn't only be working with one color when you paint. Like, that's it's too limiting, and it's not accurate to how life works. So forms are made up of a range of complex colors, and that ends up making the form appear to be complex and sophisticated. And at this stage in your development, you're trying to work in a more sophisticated manner. Very hard to see this. And this is all going to end up getting pushed back into shadow. Well, maybe not all of it. His temple here will remain. pretty prominent. And you say, well, I need a smaller brush for this ear. No. You're just going to change the way you manipulate it and using the edge. And even if I don't have like a razor sharp edge here, I'm not too worried about it because any areas that I want to be smaller, thinner, like I could just glaze those back after. And you're going to see how all these areas that are right now screaming at the same power of highlight, they're going to fall backward and have hierarchy as the painting goes along. Forgot the white of the eye. And you notice that we're just using one color here. So the initial color that I mixed is being applied regardless of the actual material. It's being used for hair, skin, and fabric. Just kind of quickly scratching this side temple here. And honestly, that might be the extent of this first layer of scumbling. You're going to kind of go back infinitely between scumbling and glazing, but your first layer of scumbling, just as your first layer of glazing will be, is larger than your subsequent layers. So it's like watercolor in oil in a sense that progressively with each layer you work in a smaller and smaller area, but initially you're kind of working more of the painting at once. I know I just said that I'm going to kind of move on from the stage, but I just kind of keep noticing areas that that could use a little bit of lighting. All right, I'm going to rinse my brush off and get ready to start the glazing process. That was a mistake, but it's there now, so we'll deal with that in the glazing process. I just want to take a moment to address the way I'm set up here. I always advocate for people who are right-handed to have all of their materials to the right, and those who are left-handed to have everything to the left. I'm completely contrary to that because I'm right-handed and everything is to the left. The reason I'm doing that is for camera, so that you can see everything at once. So kind of a clumsy setup for me, but it's just so that you can see. So as we progress towards the glazing stage, we're going to use the opposite technique. So you need a cup of water. We're going to dip into our dark color. Now I realize like you don't have the color that I use to ground the boards if you're in the fall 2021 class. Because I grounded these for you in the interest of time. Just mix it dark. It doesn't really matter. We're going to start up at the top and just working vertical lines. We're going to glaze over almost everything except for our strongest highlights. And I just realized that I did glaze over one of the strong highlights. That's okay. We'll get it back eventually. Each layer of glaze that you put down is going to increasingly darken the original ground. So we're going to be left with, I just realized you can't even see this. See how much that's already falling backward into space? We're going to be left with paintings that are significantly darker on the backgrounds, even though we'll never have mixed up a solid dark over them. Again, I realize some of these areas are not all that dark, but at this stage we're just trying to get our scumbling layer to attach to the ground. And it's going to be a back and forth process. This entire thing can all be glazed back. I'm going to zoom out more somehow. So I kind of dip into the water, then dip into my paint. You got to keep it thin. If it's too dark, you're going to lose. I'm sorry. If it's too thick, you're going to lose all of the work that you did on the lower layers, and it's really an opacity way of working. Like we want to be able to see through our layers, whether we're using scumbling or glazing. So yeah, the majority of the painting here I'm coating with the glaze. regardless of how bright I want it to be in the end, this is how we're going to get things to attach. I haven't done this this process in a very long time. I think you'll come to like it once you get the hang of it. There's a little bit of a learning curve. I find it so dramatic. And glaze over this whole side. Again, have all of your brush strokes running in the same direction. In most cases, people's grounds are set with vertical brush strokes. There are a couple of you, depending on which direction your board was cut from. Some of them may be horizontal. So just run your brush strokes in the direction of the original ground for consistency's sake. Also, I'm going to try to hide the brush strokes as well, so don't really want to see ends to them. I should have another glove on. I'm trying to not touch the paint here, or the painting. All right. There's my initial glaze layer, and if you rewind to the start of that process a little bit, you'll see how much of a difference that makes. I've got to wait for this to dry, which is a little bit irritating because I have to let it dry. So once that is dry, though, completely dry, I can progress to the next layer of the scumbling. So I'll be back in just a moment when this is dry. All right, my first layer of glaze is dry. Back to scumbling. Make sure you have a dry brush here. Has to be dry. I've got a little bit of blue on there, but that'll just help to kind of deepen the color that I'm going to work with. So again, I'm going to mix more than I need here, just so I don't run out. Way too yellow. Bring it back down with some red, a little bit of blue. See that on the end of the brush. A bit more red. Yeah, that's better. The saturation brings them to life a little bit more. So you might ask yourself, what is the point of this painting process if you're just constantly painting over what you've done? If you're just constantly painting over what you've done before, well, you're not. You are, but you're not, because you're not painting over it in an opaque manner. So you are being left with a history of what has come before, and as those layers attach themselves down, that's how you're getting a sophisticated looking painting. Really, this technique, I think, is being used to prepare people for eventual study with oil, if they end up at that point. I think this technique is also beneficial for those moving into the watercolor class, and maybe those who end up working with gouache as well. Not that you're doing scumbling and glazing with watercolor and gouache, but just the idea of how you work with layers in a painting. So all of these sections that were really brought back into shadow before, I'm going to kind of reclaim those a little bit more. In any areas where perhaps I've started to lose the form, can get those back as well. I'm doing just another pass on the same scumbled layer, just to increase the opacity on the brightest areas just a little bit. Time to glaze again. I'm actually going to send this a little bit more towards red than it was before. And glaze back everything that is going to be in the shadow side. You see this painting just getting progressively darker and darker and darker. Scumbling now again. Slightly more red, or a lot more red added to it, just to bridge the gap between the yellow and the purple. Glazing. Scumbling. This demo concludes with glazing, but I feel like it's good practice in this process to actually finish your painting off with a scumbled layer. So whenever it is that we run out of time, I'd say that make sure that the last stage of your process is scumbling, so that way you can ensure that the level of detail is where you want it to be.
If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And as always, please continue to wash your hands, wear a mask, and hang in there.